Hello everyone and welcome back to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. So without further ado, sit back, relax and enjoy. Fools and Zombies. Chapter 1. Imagine for a second how you are sitting on a bench by an old playground. The weather is gloomy. Children with their parents are having fun despite the light drizzle. Suddenly, you get a strong obsessive feeling that someone is watching you. Out of the corner of your eye, you see that all the faces, wearing smiles and crazed looks, are fixed on you. Brains, juicy brains, that old and very worn-out phrase sounds from their mouths as ridiculously as it does from second-rate zombie horror flicks popular a few decades ago. Their little hands begin to reach out to you, hoping to taste juicy and delicious flesh. The shrill scream of a victim attracts these strange, half-decayed creatures even more. They are not familiar with fear, mercy, or repentance. They will not be taken to hell, and God will not punish them. They are not pursued by the police. Indeed, even the police themselves would now be happy to feast on their own kind. Rotten fingers gently glide across your face, and whatever remains of their teeth sink lustfully into your neck, or maybe your leg, or as a last resort, your backside. John screamed and literally jumped from the sudden pain in his fifth point of contact. Animal fear instantly turned into uncontrollable laughter. Instead of the growling of a terrifying zombie, there came a thin squeak from a starving little mouse with shiny black eyes. "Oh," John exhaled and scratched the bite mark. "All right, buddy, I'm not mad. The main thing is that after this I won't turn into a zombie mouse. At least not a second time." He carefully touched the place where human teeth marks were still visible and where dried bloodstains could be seen. Yesterday evening went, mildly speaking, not according to plan. An encounter with one of the zombies turned into a brawl. John himself did not understand how his hunting knife got knocked out of his hands, and the zombie's sharp teeth sank into his arm, preventing him from reaching for his pistol. By the time he finally got the weapon in his hand, his opponent retreated with lightning speed and hurried to hide behind the nearest corner of the half-ruined kindergarten building. Pursuing him made no sense. Everything was already over. Rummaging in his pocket, John pulled out a half-eaten piece of stale rye bread and a tiny slice of canned cheese. The little mouse, having run a safe distance away, twitched its nose, sniffing the treat. "Here you go, little rascal, that's all I've got," John said as he offered the promised food. The mouse cast a wary glance at the smiling face of its new friend and cautiously approached. "You know, when I was a kid, I often watched a cartoon about you," John continued, watching the little creature devour the snack. Yes, there was a cat and a mouse, just like you. How much trouble your kind caused." "Ah, those were the days." John looked at the gray sky filled with leaden clouds that were about to burst with cold rain. For more than a year, the weather had hardly changed. There was no winter, no summer, just one endless autumn, ever since the Judgment Day when the missiles left the silos in which they had slumbered for half a century and flew toward pre-selected targets. The whole world reduced to dust. Those idiots really believed they were fighting for a just cause. John sighed, picking up his hefty backpack from the ground. Like the wise folks used to say, fighting for peace is the same as making love for virginity. Finishing his meal, the mouse let out a satisfied squeak. "Yeah, little guy, exactly," John said. "Staying fed now is the only real joy. And hey, don't mind me talking to you. I just can't have a conversation with any of my own kind, 'cause all of them, every last one, would love to snack on my brain. 10 years. For 10 whole years, I haven't spoken to anyone. Can you imagine how hard that is? Even the great Robinson Crusoe never dreamed of something like that, especially considering I once worked as a taxi driver. That's practically applied psychiatry, so many types of people I used to drive around, and so many beautiful women. Eh. The mouse nodded as if in understanding, or so it seemed to John. Still, the little creature kept staring intently at its new acquaintance. In those tiny black eyes, a 50-year-old man was reflected, with strands of gray in his hair and a thick, long beard. He was dressed haphazardly. In this new world, beauty meant nothing, while comfort, especially when running from zombies, was valued above all else. Lately, though, for about 2 years or maybe more, whenever the infected spotted John, they themselves tended to hide in the nearest alley. Apparently, the power of his weapons and his determined look did the trick. Dawn is coming. We need to hurry. It's dangerous to stay here, though it probably doesn't scare you. For some reason, ours and yours don't really collide, John concluded and glanced again at his silent companion. Contrary to expectations, the little mouse didn't run away. On the contrary, it carefully climbed up his right pant leg and made itself comfortable on his shoulder, like a loyal parrot that is part of the classic image of an old pirate, except John had neither a wooden leg nor a patch over one eye. Maybe that was for the best. All right, then, have it your way, John grumbled with mock reluctance. We'll go together. I'll call you Jerry, after that cartoon. The deserted streets of what was once a beautiful city greeted them with a howling wind and dead silence. 10 years of wandering had not led John to meet a single normal person or any creature that had retained its humanity. During that time, he found a decent way to survive and even enjoy fragments of his former life. By stuffing pieces of rotten meat into his pockets and smearing his face with slimy dirt, he managed to fool these creatures by pretending to be one of them. And really, to keep repeating one single phrase about brains didn't require much brain power itself. The bite he got yesterday hurt badly. John had no idea how much time was left before the transformation, maybe a day, maybe an hour. What if he was already slowly losing his mind and turning into one of those terrible monsters? He didn't want to think about it. His stomach growled, and he checked his own senses. Other than hunger, he felt nothing, much to his indescribable relief. Instead of craving human flesh, he was longing for a huge, juicy hamburger washed down with a fizzy drink. But neither had existed in this new world for a long time. Over the years, he had survived on army crackers, canned food, and jars of pickles found in the basement of a private house. That was where John had settled, only occasionally venturing out to replenish his fast-dwindling supplies. Having passed Woodward Avenue, John turned down a small alley heading south and soon was walking along the Detroit River. Beyond the tall buildings on the opposite bank, the first rays of sunrise could be seen. But the sun was unlikely to remain visible once it rose behind the next gloomy cloud that clung to the spire of a gray skyscraper. Sure enough, it started to rain again, the very same rain John hated more than anything in life, the rain that was an integral part of this endless autumn. The mouse on his shoulder, which had dozed off, woke up when another icy drop fell right on its head. Without taking off his backpack, John stretched his arm toward the side pocket and pulled out a carelessly crumpled, yellow newspaper. Smoothing out the unruly pages, he fashioned a sort of flimsy canopy to barely shield himself from the nasty drops. Jerry squeaked when yet another drop, sliding off the paper, fell on him again. Sorry, buddy, but we're not stopping. It's too dangerous, and I've lingered enough already. Those zombies might not care that I'm about to become one of them. They'd still probably gobble me up, and that's something I really don't want. John absent-mindedly patted the breast pocket where his loaded pistol lay. Better handle it myself, he tried to reassure himself. When the time comes, better me then. Their walk didn't last long. John had chosen his next temporary campsite near the financial district station. In truth, he never used the subway. Contrary to the expectations of die-hard post-apocalyptic fans, the subway tunnels had been among the first to be destroyed and flooded, rendering them useless. John was extremely lucky the moment the capital was hit by nuclear strikes. He had been out fishing about 30 kilometers from Detroit. The whole world shook for several more days from the impact of missiles, fires, and explosions at fuel depots. Probably every one of those military folks who unleashed this hell upon innocent people believed they were doing a righteous deed, cleansing the earth of some unknown menace. In reality, the outcome was exactly the opposite. After nearly 3 years roaming through forests, swamps, and fields, John finally mustered the courage to return to his hometown. The radiation levels were still high, though it posed no greater danger than the wandering zombies. At first, he tried listening to the radio, but there was only silence on every frequency. In any case, hardly any radio stations remained. Now even receivers themselves had become things of the past, and total silence had descended upon the world. Gloomy skyscrapers peered into the leaden sky through shattered windows. The sun once again failed to overcome the eternal shroud covering the heavens. The rain intensified, forcing John to quicken his pace. Squeezing past a broken turnstile, he found himself in the vast, gloomy atrium of the Renaissance Center. Something rustled in the corner. John reached for his breast pocket, ready to draw his weapon at any moment. Jerry on his shoulder fidgeted and let out a long squeak. At that instant, a huge black cat darted out from under the roughly stacked boards. Its sharp claws aimed at the tiny prey. With a swift motion, John managed to shield Jerry, almost sacrificing his own face. His backpack served as excellent protection against the wild animal. Receiving a blow, the cat yelled loudly. Realizing there'd be no meal today, the black shape quickly retreated. "Ah, you got lucky, Jerry," John said. The mouse squeaked again, either to thank him for saving it or simply to recover from the sudden shock. "All right, let's go." "I'll show you something," John said and headed toward the wide grand staircase. "I'll bet you've never seen this before." The once magnificent and insanely expensive stairs were now a pitiful sight, broken boards and bent metal rods. Instead of granite steps, there was a mosaic of unsightly chunks of stone. Climbing to the 60th floor without an elevator was getting harder every year. Just a couple of years ago, it only took 5 breaks. Now, it took at least 8. Old age is no joy, and senility is no, well, you know, John thought sadly, catching his breath after another flight of stairs. What'll happen to me in another year? Then he grimaced. Stupid old man, there isn't going to be another year. He looked at the zombie bite marks. Yeah, well, never mind, there's still time. A large 0 hung grimly on the wall of the required floor, and the plastic digit 6 lay broken on the ground. Yet there was no doubt he had reached the correct floor. Passing through a narrow corridor, they emerged into a huge space that used to serve as something like a Congress hall. "Well, here we are," John announced with satisfaction. Most of the glass was gone, and gusts of wind howled inside. John went over to one of the shattered windows and sat on the very edge. Jerry remained calmly perched on his shoulder, gazing at the grim view with beady eyes. The panorama was indeed grand, neither beautiful nor horrific, but truly grand. The immense city stretched in every direction, its roads branching out like veins of a dead giant. The same leaden clouds gently covered the city like a dome, and there was unending silence. "Ah, Jerry," John exhaled. "You can't even imagine what this city used to be like. Thousands of cars were racing on these roads, honking at each other. Smiling couples strolled down sunlit avenues, arm in arm. Green parks and squares delighted kids who came with their parents to feed wild squirrels. And I lived over there." He pointed to the southeast. Yes, over there was my home, my family, my wife, Marianne, and my daughter, Daisy. Jerry tilted his head knowingly and rested it on John's shoulder. You probably can't grasp it. You guys have 10 kids at once sometimes, but I only have one daughter. John felt a tear roll down his cheek. Damn zombies. If it weren't for them, everything would have turned out differently. I wouldn't be sitting here like this. And what's there to say? I'm about to become one of those monsters myself. With these words, he carefully drew the pistol from his pocket. Jerry stirred anxiously, as if sensing something was off. John looked over the gleaming barrel of his weapon. Sorry, Jerry, but there's no other way. This world has become completely alien and no longer belongs to people. There's nobody left who could. Suddenly, far below, he thought he saw movement. Of course, it could have been anything, a dog, a cat, a zombie, or who knows what, but it didn't change his plan. He cocked the gun and pressed it to his temple. The motion below repeated. It was a long way down, but he could clearly see a human figure running from one building to another. John grunted, lowering his gun. That's strange. I've never seen a zombie move like that. Hey, did you see that? He asked Jerry, who remained silent. Curiosity got the better of him. After all, there would be plenty of time later to put a period on his life, and taking out more zombies first seemed like a good idea. Running down the endless stairs proved much easier. In one burst, John made it to the bottom and sprinted for the exit. Right outside the building, among the cluster of rusting cars, lay that all too familiar silence. The pistol's trigger clicked reassuringly as he cocked the hammer. John was done pretending to be one of those monsters. He'd been at that charade too long. Now it was time to pull off the mask. A loud blow from something heavy literally stunned him. Keeping his footing was impossible. The pistol slipped from his hands and skidded under a nearby rusted car. John only managed to gasp before losing consciousness. Chapter 2. Brains, juicy, tender brains, a disgusting walking corpse whispered into his ear, slurping with unearthly pleasure as it scooped out the last bits of John's brain from his skull. The other monsters were eagerly gnawing at the pale bones that now replaced his arms and legs. Yet John himself continued watching this bloody feast with an absolutely detached gaze. Instead of pain or fear, all he felt was an overwhelming sense of inhuman exhaustion. One of the creatures crawled toward his ear and started licking it gently, producing a repulsive itching sensation. "Back off, you vile rodent," roared a female voice. A haze crept over John's eyes, dissolving the horrific scene and the cursed creatures. In their place, he saw a flickering red glow from a small fire in an unfamiliar area, part of which lay under open sky. Nearby, Jerry sat faithfully, glaring suspiciously, perhaps even with some rodent-like resentment, at a dark figure whose features were barely visible in the thickening twilight. John felt an enormous wave of surprise when, instead of some tired old reference to brains, he heard genuine human speech. "You awake?" asked a pleasant female voice. Emerging from the shadows, a slender woman of about 35, with long white hair neatly braided, stood before him. "Would you believe it? That little rodent almost bit your ear off," she continued. "I tried chasing him away, but he kept coming back. Maybe he's rabid? Hey, get out of here, now, or else." With those words, she grabbed a length of rebar from the ground. This move boded nothing good for Jerry. The mouse hissed angrily and scurried off. To say John was speechless would be an understatement. After celebrating her grand victory over a tiny mouse, the woman stepped closer and offered the dumbfounded John a small chocolate bar. "Want some?" she asked, unwrapping it and casually taking a big bite herself. Who are you? John barely whispered. Well, first of all, I'm a human, the stranger replied through a mouthful of chocolate. Second, I'm a woman. And my name is Evangeline, but you can just call me Eva. How did you get here? How did you? 100 questions tried to burst out of him at once, resulting in incoherent mumbling. I'm not from around here, Eva answered. I came about a month ago. I'm looking for something, and I was just about to reach my goal when you showed up. Strange, John muttered, getting to his feet. In the firelight, Eva's eyes shone an emerald hue. John had never seen anything quite like it, though maybe he simply hadn't seen a single living soul, apart from the walking dead, in a very long time. She was nothing like them. Her slightly upturned nose and full lips moved in sync with the rhythmic chewing of chocolate. Man, I can't live without sweets. Sorry, Eva grumbled, crumpling the empty wrapper and tossing it into the fire. It's okay. I love sweets too. Why are you looking at me like that? She asked, noticing his stare. Is there something on my face? No. I'm just confused, John confessed, studying the new acquaintance as though she were an alien from a distant star. It's just that I haven't seen another human in 10 years. Eva hummed thoughtfully, and that's why you live with that disgusting mouse? He's not just a mouse, and he's not disgusting, John shot back, a bit hurt by her dismissive tone. His name is Jerry, like in that cartoon, remember? Eva only gave a vague shake of her head. Naturally, she'd likely never seen the classic animation of Days Long Gone, days no one now remained to chronicle. At that moment, John felt like a true old man. What were you doing up there? She asked. Where? In that big tower. Oh, that. I was showing Jerry the view of this fine city, John joked, not going into detail. What were you doing up there? I was looking for something, Eva answered, just as evasively. By the way, you got lucky. I realized in time you weren't a zombie. Otherwise, it wouldn't have ended with just one blow to the head. Yeah, lucky, John said sarcastically, rubbing the huge bump. He decided not to mention he'd already been bitten and that his fate was sealed. Another blow to the head was the last thing he wanted. How did you figure out I wasn't one of them? I always pass as one. The smell of rotten meat in my pockets, my face smeared with dirt, and my slightly blank stare have never let me down before. Your blank stare is fine, Eva said dryly, but that mouse, what do you call it, Jerry, would never get near a zombie. They emit a certain enzyme that makes them aggressive toward one another. But that little thing was calmly sitting on your shoulder when I snuck up behind you. Wait a second. So even before you hit me, you knew I was human? John blurted out. Well, if we're being honest, I had my doubts. Anything's possible. Maybe you were a killer or a maniac, or worse, ex-military. What do you have against the military? Those idiots destroyed the whole world. Is that reason enough? Probably, John agreed. But they had no choice, you know, zombies and all. Yeah, like there was nothing on this planet but fools and zombies, and now there are hardly even fools left. There's always a choice. Doing nothing sometimes leaves you no choice, Eva retorted. Where are you from? I came from the East. My father worked here, well, served, if that's what it was called. The last message I got from him before the catastrophe was an invitation. He wanted to tell me something really important. And now here I am. Isn't it a bit late? John smirked. To survive and adapt takes time. I knew everything was done for, but something kept pulling me here. Have you met any other people? John asked hopefully. No, Eva replied grimly and sat closer to the fire. Only those terrible creatures, and I try to avoid them. Life, as they say, is more important than revenge. What about you? Me? I was born and raised in this city. Lived an absolutely ordinary life, nothing special to tell. When that fateful day came, I lost everything, my wife, my sweet daughter. My whole world collapsed at once, and I've been wandering around ever since, for reasons I don't even know. Maybe I'm just afraid to die. I roam aimlessly and without purpose. I'm sorry, Eva said softly. As for me, I'm determined to reach my goal and find out what my father wanted to say. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe it's not too late. There are no people left in Detroit, John blurted out, then quickly added, I'm sorry. It's fine, Eva sighed. I'll pretend I didn't hear that. Still, I believe it's better to have even a slim hope than none at all. So what's the point of it all? John wondered. Believe me, I ask myself that question every morning. Night passed. The early dawn light slowly overcame the darkness, bringing another day to the world of endless autumn. John opened his eyes. Curled up in a little ball on his chest lay Jerry, asleep. There was no one else around. The fire was almost out, leaving a patch of scorched earth and a few glowing embers. Could it all have been a dream? John asked himself, gently placing Jerry on the ground and getting to his feet. Morning was as cold and dank as ever. Burr, he shuddered, examining the empty space. Wow, to dream such a thing, a living human being. He laughed aloud. Yeah, sure. But then he noticed he was in some half-collapsed building, part of its roof open to the leaden sky, a place completely unfamiliar and a bit frightening. Stranger still, he had no memory of how he got there. Automatically rubbing the back of his head, he touched the very bump the girl from his dream had given him. Hold on. What kind of dream has a real bump? So you're awake, came that same pleasant female voice. I didn't want to disturb you, but while the coals were still hot, I managed to brew a decent cup of coffee. I bet you haven't tasted this in ages. Eva extended a metal mug containing a murky, steaming liquid that gave off a pleasant aroma. The unusual yet long-forgotten taste warmed John from the inside, and something like warmth spread through his soul. Will you come with me? Eva asked, her voice holding a note of hope as she gazed into John's eyes. He didn't look away. Could she really think that after 10 years of wandering in complete loneliness, with no meaning or hope, he might refuse? Yeah. I'll help you, he said. Then we'll get out of here forever. Where to? She asked, surprised. I want to go south, where it's warm and there's an ocean. I've never seen the ocean. For a long time, the thought of boundless blue waters had filled John's dreams. He pictured the ocean as majestic yet calm, as blue as the sky and as endlessly deep as Eva's eyes. All would be well, except seeing a real ocean might be out of reach. The bite on John's arm still hurt, and the throbbing was becoming unbearable. No, he told himself, there's still time. I'll hold on. Why now, just when life had regained some semblance of purpose? There were no answers, of course, and maybe none were needed. Eva nodded, satisfied, and began packing her things into a small backpack she had taken from her shoulders. Then let's go. It's a long way, and keep that rodent away from me. One step too close, and it'll be his last mistake, she threatened. John just shrugged and let Jerry climb onto the collar of his jacket as he headed for the exit. The city still greeted its only living inhabitants with empty avenues and dead courtyards. Eva's eyes were filled with profound sorrow, especially when they passed by ruined playgrounds where broken wooden horses, rusty swings, and shattered slides remained. Do you have any children? John asked gently. No, I didn't have time, she confessed to him. Maybe it's for the best. just not in this world. And what happened to your family? I don't know, sighed Jake. I wasn't in the city when it all happened. And by the time I finally got there, it was all over, ransacked apartment, children's things scattered on the floor, and no sign of them. In my heart, they're still alive. Like angels? Yeah, like angels. They walked the entire day. A couple of times, figures of cursed zombies flickered in the distance. Skillful camouflage or just pure luck spared them from a direct encounter. By evening, an enormous gray building loomed up ahead. Its shattered windows and half-destroyed facade promised nothing good. Long, sharp spires literally cut into the belly of the slowly drifting black clouds. Is this the place? Looks like it, nodded Eve. It looks pretty grim. I doubt anyone could have survived. I'm sorry. This used to be where the Department of Defense was located. That's why this area took so many hits, really heavy bombing. My father told me about some bunker right under this building. During the attack, the top military brass were supposed to shelter down there. So there might still be people living there? I really doubt it, she replied. After so many years, they would have tried to come to the surface. And what if they were infected, and now the entire bunker is teeming with zombies? There's only one way to find out, declared Eve firmly and headed for the entrance. I've come too far and I'm not about to turn back. Jake and Jerry exchanged glances. In the little mouse's eyes, there wasn't the slightest trace of human fear, which calmed Jake a bit. Shrugging, he trudged after his restless companion. Chapter 3. The building looked more than imposing. The closer they got to the monumental staircase leading into its depths, the more their hearts sank with foreboding. Along the way, Jake checked his camouflage once more and, just in case, pulled a piece of rotting meat a bit farther out of his pocket to heighten the already unpleasant stench. The pistol's grip felt comforting in his hand and gave him confidence. Better safe than sorry, said Jake, catching Eve's fleeting glance at his weapon. Getting through the collapsed arches turned out to be not as easy as it looked from outside. Each step, each clumsy movement, could trigger a new collapse, and no one wanted a falling brick to land on their head. The oppressive atmosphere of destruction pressed in from the very entrance, stretching across the endless halls and chambers of this long-dead structure. We go that way, Eve said confidently. How do you know? A long time ago, when I was a kid, my father took me on a tour of this place, and I think I'm starting to remember a little. Well, Jake thought, shaking his head. How can anyone remember anything if everything here is in ruins? But he chose not to argue. They wandered the dead corridors, constantly listening for any rustle. Even Jerry, with his tiny heart pounding, carefully watched their surroundings. A thick layer of dust lay evenly on everything around, furniture, decor, and once expensive finishes, all either looted or left to decay over time. Here and there, angry messages written in red paint on the walls declared, "Burn in hell, scum, hope you all die, murderers, idiots," and so on, promising nothing good for the former inhabitants. On the central staircase, a tattered flag still hung in shreds. Once a symbol of a great nation now lost to oblivion, its yellow tatters perfectly mirrored the fate of the entire world of which it had once been a part. The spiraling steps led into the dim space below. Surprisingly, the structure was still in decent shape. Landing by landing, the travelers carefully descended. Jake lit his homemade flashlight. Fortunately, there were still enough batteries left in Washington, D.C. to keep it powered. When you have hands that work well enough, you can usually secure the bare essentials without too much trouble, as long as you don't break your camouflage. Then everything should be tip-top, he thought, and touched the itchy bite on his skin again. The descent felt endless. After yet another landing, Jake lost count. I never imagined there could be a place like this down here, he whispered, as though afraid someone might hear. It was as though they were entering the chambers of a real-life hell, which, judging by the depth of the shaft, was getting pretty close. No one imagined, Eve answered just as quietly, or they simply didn't want to imagine. After all, why prepare for the end of the world if living afterward makes no sense? Wait. I think this is it. Jake aimed the flashlight beam at a warning sign featuring a yellow triangle bordered by 3 petals and an outline. Stop. Show your pass. Armed guard ahead. Bright markings plainly suggested lurking danger. The passageway was very narrow, no huge passage galleries, no empty atriums or the typical nonsense of spooky bunkers. A foul stench mixed with mold hit their noses. At first, Jake thought it was coming from the chunk of meat in his pocket, kept there to fool mindless zombies. But no, this was something else. After years of roaming, Jake had become a connoisseur of foul odors, and with every step, the smell grew stronger and almost unbearable. Fungal spores in a greenish film spread from the floor and along the walls. Underfoot, the ground squelched. The flashlight beam slid over the murky puddle that spread across the entire floor. The dull drip of water echoed through the tunnel, escalating into a sort of drumbeat in the endless silence. Drip, 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 counted the unwelcoming bunker. Step carefully, Eve warned. Good grief, it stinks, Jake said, pinching his nose with his thumb and index finger against the acrid stench. Jerry began to squirm on his shoulder and started squeaking miserably. What's wrong, little guy? Jake asked, scooping the mouse into his palm. After that, Jerry settled down a bit. Did he sense something? What is it, Jerry? Naturally, there was no reply. Do you talk to mice often? Eve asked mockingly. More often than I talk to people, Jake answered calmly. At least they're not looking to eat your brain. That's debatable, the girl remarked. I know one story. Please, spare me, Jake interrupted. Not the right time. Well, fine. For a second, he thought Eve had playfully stuck out her tongue at him, a carefree gesture that hardly fit her tough exterior but left a surprisingly pleasant impression. So there's still something good and human left in her, Jake decided, smiling slightly. Farther ahead, the tunnel sloped downward until it reached a massive metal door that seemed to serve as a kind of airtight seal. The door was slightly ajar. Help me, said Eve, grabbing the edge of the door with both hands and pulling with all her strength. Together, they managed to widen the opening just enough to squeeze through sideways. Inside was a narrow corridor with relatively clean walls and dim, flickering lights. If not for the flashlight, Jake wouldn't have seen an intact bulb for about 7 years, one that was actually hooked up to some power source. My father was right. We'll find our answers here, Eve said, a note of excitement in her voice, though Jake didn't share her optimism. Don't celebrate yet. We don't really know what's in there, he cautioned. Could be swarms of monsters or something worse. Ignoring him, Eve pressed on. It was impossible to gauge the bunker's true size. Twisting corridors branched into large halls or narrowed so much that they had to squeeze along one wall. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of offshoots led into the unknown or ended in dead ends. The dim emergency lighting couldn't penetrate the thick gloom of the bunker, though the fact it even existed hinted that some power source was still functional. Apprehension grew with every minute they spent in this unfamiliar place. It didn't look terrifying, on the contrary, it was almost too tidy for this new world of ruin and decay. The only constant was the unbearable stench that hung in the air, filling everything. Wait, Eve said abruptly, halting. Listen. Jake strained to hear but picked up only the distant dripping of water. No, nothing, he admitted. Maybe you imagined. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, a real shot that echoed through all the corridors, amplified like an echo until it made their ears ring. Acting on instinct, Jake dropped to the floor, taking Eve down with him. Another blast sounded overhead, and the bullet ricocheted off the floor, shattering a light fixture. Razor-sharp shards rained down, and everything went dark. A heavy stamp of boots was so swift it was impossible to tell the direction it came from at first, but the attacker's shrill laughter and ravings were as startling as the gunshots themselves. "What the hell was that, zombies?" Eve asked, catching her breath. "No way. They wouldn't shoot." Meanwhile, a fleeting figure disappeared around the nearest corner. In the half-light, they couldn't make out many details, but one thing was certain: whoever it was, they were human. Maybe a deranged human, but still a living person. "We have to catch him," Eve said, getting to her feet decisively. "Are you crazy?" Jake protested. "Who knows what traps he's set up? And judging by his enthusiasm, he's not exactly happy to see us." "But what if it's—" she faltered. "Your father," Jake finished grimly. "That's ridiculous. After all these years, the one person left is him?" "Still, I want to make sure," Eve insisted. "Are you coming with me, or are you going to hide in your hole with your tail between your legs?" Judging by Jerry's squeaks, he wasn't opposed to ducking back into a safer spot, but Jake couldn't ignore the sting to his pride, something no man can easily dismiss. "Fine," he agreed. "But if I get shot, you're the one to blame, got it?" Chapter 4. They moved more slowly and carefully now. Every rustle, every flicker of a shadow cast by the old lights made them stop and listen. A deep rumble sounded from somewhere in the complex. The already dim lighting flickered at times, leaving them in total darkness for a moment before flaring feebly back to life. "Looks like the reactor is overloading," observed Eve. "You mean a nuclear reactor?" Jake exclaimed. "How could something like that end up in the heart of Washington, D.C.? Apparently, it was meant for the worst-case scenario. Nothing else would have run this long." "Yeah, those creeps really tried to save their own skins," Jake grunted but fell silent under Eve's disapproving glare. "Sorry. I wasn't talking about your father." "It's fine. Just watch your step," Eve said, moving on. No one wanted to end up in a trap meant for zombies or, worse, catch a bullet. There were plenty of perils in this strange inhabitant's lair, and none of them felt like testing them out firsthand. Jake noticed he was already getting used to the stench and recalled that people, like cockroaches, can adapt to almost anything. "Does that mean I'll eventually get used to being a walking corpse?" "Corpse?" Eve asked, and Jake realized he'd spoken aloud again. "You know, we could all become zombies eventually, hypothetically speaking." "So that's it?" Eve suddenly grabbed Jake's hand, lifting it into the beam of his flashlight. The wound looked terrible. "Ow!" Jake yanked his hand back under his jacket. "That hurts." "When were you going to tell me about this?" she asked, her stern gaze boring into his shifting eyes. "Maybe when I started craving some fresh meat." "No, of course not. When I met you, I was afraid to say something right away, and then we ended up here, you know." Before Jake could finish, more footsteps sounded at the end of yet another hallway. "Over there!" Eve shouted, barely leaping aside as an automatic burst hissed overhead. "You won't take me, you freaks," a raspy voice rang out, followed by a coarse laugh. Jake wanted to yell back exactly what he thought about being shot at, but the strange figure disappeared down another passage, leaving only the smell of gunpowder. "Damn it," Eve growled, scrambling upright. "Another second, and I'd have been Swiss cheese. We have to stop him before he does something stupid." "I'm in," Jake said decisively. Charging straight at him would be not just risky, but idiotic. Taking a bullet from some maniac holed up in this bunker didn't seem like a great plan, and neither did shooting back, no matter how justified. After all, this was still a human being, and there was always Eve's faint hope he might be her father. "So what's your plan?" she asked hopefully. "We lure him out and ambush him. Then, we'll see." "I don't like that 'we'll see.'" "You're not going to." "No, of course not," Jake insisted. "I'll distract him, and you can handle any heavy lifting. You're good at that." "All right," he said with a taut smile. With deliberately loud footsteps, Jake headed toward the room where the stranger had run. He grabbed a wooden stick from the pile of debris. Junk was everywhere down here. Eve followed him quietly. "Hey, you! We're not enemies. We're not zombies," Jake shouted at the top of his lungs. "Listen, we want to help. Don't shoot. We're humans." Rustling sounded in response. Jake tensed, ready to leap aside at any second. The sound repeated, but instead of a person, a huge rat scurried by, its red eyes gleaming so brightly that Jake felt goosebumps. Jerry squeaked. Apparently, he didn't like large cousins either. Just as humans often can't stand each other for trivial differences, so too do rodents not necessarily get along. Another door appeared up ahead. A yellowed sign, hanging crookedly on the wall, read, "Central Command Post. Reserve Control, ASIAS." Neither Jake nor Eve knew what the odd acronym stood for, but Central and Command Post offered a bit of reassurance. Squeezing through, Jake found himself in a fairly large hall filled with the remains of dozens of shattered monitors and TV screens. Dusty phone handsets dangled limply from tangled cords. Thick folders of useless documents lay toppled in piles on the desks. The same foul stench filled the air, forcing them to grimace with every breath. A crunch of boot on broken glass sounded behind him. Jerry twitched on Jake's shoulder. He was about to hiss at Eve for stepping so carelessly when an ear-splitting blow from a rifle but changed his plans. Dazed, he felt consciousness slip away. The last thing he heard was another muffled thud meant for someone else, followed by the shrill rantings of that unpleasant voice. Then everything went dark. A flickering bulb pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. Opening his eyes hurt, and part of him didn't even want to see those battered walls of a god-forsaken bunker or breathe in that same horrible odor. The stench gnawed its way into his nose and deep into his brain. It made him want to retch. "Hey, are you okay?" asked Eve, crouching nearby. Strange, amusing images floated through Jake's head, a pink rhinoceros chasing a fluffy cloud, a long striped snake trying to swallow the sun but gulping down a giant eye instead. Wait, was that his own eye? A sharp slap across the face jolted Jake back to harsh reality. "Ow. That hurts," he muttered in protest. "Thank goodness." "Could be worse," Eve exhaled in relief. "Who are you people? Damn it," boomed a rough male voice. "If you plan to eat me, then do it. What are you waiting for, you freaks?" "I'm not scared." "Come on." "Calm down," Eve said curtly. "We're not going to chew on your brains. And frankly, I wouldn't want to touch you anyway. No offense, but you reek." Such a long string of coherent speech clearly threw the stranger off. His beady, nearly feral eyes darted around. His lips quivered, itching to spit out more vile words. Filthy, matted gray hair hung in strands over his narrow shoulders. Deep wrinkles and rough skin suggested a man of quite advanced age. "Who are you?" he repeated, a bit calmer. "First off, we're human," Eve answered. "I'm sure that's your biggest concern. My name doesn't matter as much as who you are and why you tried to kill us." The man stared at Eve blankly. Meanwhile, Jake felt around for the little mouse in the darkness, scooping Jerry onto his usual perch. Their bond was odd, not easily explained, but it already felt natural, though they had met only days ago. Jake chalked it up to how isolation can shape someone's mind. Once more, who are you? Eve pressed. I'm Jake Frederick Crawford, the steamboat man, that's who I am, the old man declared, spitting on the floor. Careful, warned Eve, her hand drifting to the handle of Jake's pistol, now tucked behind her belt. You think you can fool me, you filthy zombies? I know what you are. I turn my back, and you'll tear out my throat. I'm not stupid, and I'm never gonna be one of you. I'll never become like that. Looks like he's lost his mind, Jake muttered. Me? Lost my mind, snarled the stranger. How dare you talk to me like that? Stand at attention. Eyes front. Present arms. What the hell are you babbling about? Tell us your real name, and do you know anything about my father? Eve demanded. Father? I'm a father, a creator, a god. I'm the last true human on this planet. I won't let you scum devour me. Over my dead body. He's delusional, noted Jake. Delusional? You ups destroyed my country. We saved the world from the outbreak, from them. We had no choice. We're heroes, so show some respect. Heroes? Because of you, my family died, Jake snapped, fists clenched. You destroyed an entire world, you bastards. We saved the world from this plague. We, them, anyway, there was no other option, the old man insisted. We're heroes. Treat me with respect. If it weren't for me. Before he could finish, Jake threw a punch that crunched against the man's nose. Blood trickled from his nostrils. Yes, do it. That's all you zombies can do, he sneered, spitting blood. A loud bang cut him off. The spent casing clattered on the floor, rolling away. Eve lowered the gun. I said enough, she repeated, returning the pistol to her belt. Jake and the old man glared at each other but didn't speak. Beating each other to a pulp was tempting, yet the situation was at a stalemate, and they all knew it. Eve looked at the officer, who was panting on the floor and barely able to lift his head. It's totally useless, she said. I'm looking for one person. He worked in your lab. His name is Eugene Marshall. He's my father. Do you know what happened to him? Do I know Marshall? The officer almost burst out laughing, then wiped the blood from under his nose with the same dirty sleeve. Of course I know him, curse him to hell. Everybody knows him. He was the lead expert on virus dissemination. Only he knows how to rid the world of filth. Where is he now? Eve asked hopefully. He's here with me, General Harrington replied haughtily. When the tragedy happened and the world turned to ashes, about a dozen scientists and military personnel ended up sealed in this bunker. Noticing the spark of interest in the girl's eyes, he slowed down and spoke every word with sadistic relish. When the tragedy happened and the world turned to ashes, about a dozen scientists and military personnel ended up sealed in this bunker. He threw another hateful glance at the storyteller, though the latter didn't even twitch, and then turned his full attention to Eve. He's alive. Eve exclaimed joyfully. So he's alive. Thank God. It wasn't all in vain. Where is he now? You didn't let me finish my story, General Harrington continued, ignoring the question. In the big wide world, everything started with a simple cold, at least that's what the press said. Then came an outbreak of an unknown disease in some tiny Chinese city you never heard of before. Everyone assumed it was just a fever, but it began to spread across the globe at lightning speed. 1 million got sick, then more became infected. The mortality rate was enormous, a plague of the 21st century. We already know this, Eve broke in. Get to the point. Where is he? She was impatient to learn the truth about her father. What comes next, you probably don't know. Didn't you think it was strange that the zombies didn't appear right away? By that time, half the planet had already been sick. Where did they suddenly come from? Why did our country deliver a preemptive strike with strategic nuclear forces? What are strategic nuclear forces? Ethan asked. Strategic nuclear forces, you blockhead idiot, General Harrington spat. Ethan turned crimson with rage and hatred for this man, though he didn't even consider him human. He wanted to tear his throat out, rip out a nice, fat chunk, but wait, what was he thinking? Ethan jerked himself back to reality. What chunk? Could it be the infection? Was this the end? I'm about to become one of them. No, I have to fight it. I don't want this. What's wrong with you? Eve asked anxiously. Looks like I'm turning into a zombie, Ethan responded in horror, looking at his hand. Turning into a zombie? General Harrington erupted into a vile, wheezing laugh. Turning into a zombie? Really? His loud cackling echoed off the walls, as if they were mocking the terrified Ethan, whose face was dripping with beads of sweat, or maybe tears. What does a person feel, standing not just on the brink of life and death, but on the brink of death and a meaningless existence at its edge? Shut up. Eve suddenly snapped. Don't you have any compassion? Compassion? General Harrington changed his tone abruptly. What compassion? We've been living in this stinking bunker for 10 years with no sewage and no decent food. I wake up every day in my own filth and eat rotting rations. Does that deserve compassion? Maybe you still don't understand. No? Then I'll show you something. Let's go. With these words, General Harrington rose from the floor and headed for the exit of the central post. Where is he going? Ethan asked. Eve shrugged. I don't know, but I have to find my father. Chapter 5. General Harrington walked silently and confidently. After 10 years in a place like this, he could easily find his way, guided by nothing but a single faintly glowing bulb at the end of the endless corridors of the bunker. Floor after floor, level after level, passages and grim rooms replaced one another. Sometimes, bones that looked distinctly human turned up underfoot. Ethan had long since grown used to the horrors of this new world, but he still couldn't remain calm in the face of such things. Where are we going? Eve couldn't help but ask as they passed yet another dust and filth-covered room. You'll see everything soon. You wanted to see your father. I don't like this, Ethan whispered. But Eve paid no attention. She had waited too long for this moment. It doesn't look like many people are living here. Or maybe they stored enough supplies for 10 years, Ethan continued to mumble from behind. I'll show you my chamber. Everyone's already gathered there for your arrival, General Harrington chuckled and opened another airtight hatch. Darkness reigned inside the cramped room, but this time it felt different, almost oppressively heavy and tinged with a strange, sweetish smell. My dear guests, General Harrington began ceremoniously. Allow me to introduce our humble group. With these words, he clicked some hidden switch. Instead of the lights coming on, an unseen mechanism in the corridor they had just passed buzzed, making the lamps flicker before dying again. It's a trap. Ethan managed to shout before General Harrington shoved him hard from behind. Ethan barely kept his balance and prepared to fight back, but a sudden, searing pain flared in his right leg. "Ah!" he screamed and collapsed onto the slick, sticky floor. In the darkness, he couldn't tell what was happening to Eve, but the sounds of scuffling didn't last long, and soon there was silence. An indescribable horror and the almost uncontrollable urge to vomit washed over Ethan when the light finally came on. At first, his mind refused to believe what his eyes saw, making up excuses for the monstrous sight. The huge chamber, even by the bunker's standards, was splattered with crimson stains. Piles of bones and human skulls lay around in a chaotic mess. The walls were lined with shapeless chunks of rotting meat. Now the sickly sweet smell of decay made sense. At the center of the room, thick pipes, like plump, slippery snakes interwoven in some bizarre knot, converged into a single massive cauldron reminiscent of a water reservoir or something like that. A huge metal lid covered it, and inside, something bubbled loudly, releasing dense steam. Ethan glanced down and saw that a metal trap had clamped onto his right leg. Brownish blood poured from the wound, sending waves of pain that threatened to extinguish his consciousness. Behind him stood General Harrington, smiling triumphantly. Blood trickled from a gash on the general's forehead. Apparently Eve had managed to land one of her trademark blows after all. Sadly, her body now lay at the madman's feet. "No!" Ethan groaned, trying to crawl toward her. "You're caught now, my sweet ones," General Harrington said with undisguised pleasure, demonstratively licking the trail of his own blood. A swift kick to Ethan's side knocked the last of his strength away and sent him drifting into blackness. He dreamed of the same playground, in the center of which stood an old bench with a crudely carved inscription about someone's undying love for Irene. A small group of kids played in the sandbox, their laughter bright as a mountain stream. They were building sandcastles, cracking jokes, smiling their naive smiles. Among them was his Daisy. Ethan watched his daughter as if he hadn't seen her in a lifetime. Tears welled up in his eyes. She just laughed, playing cheerfully with the others, and occasionally glanced lovingly at her father. Sunbeams poured from an endless blue sky, making the whole world seem like paradise. For a moment, Ethan felt someone watching him intently, a look of unhealthy lust, the predatory desire of a hunter lying in ambush. In the next second, he noticed that all the children's eyes were fixed on him. Their laughter vanished, replaced by forced rasping. "Brains! Juicy brains," they croaked, reaching out tiny hands with splayed fingers. The horrifying sight was pierced by a bright flash as nuclear charges rained down one by one from the blackened sky. The world exploded into crimson flames so intense that Ethan could literally feel his skin melting. A hellish scream and searing pain tore apart the vision, dragging him from oblivion. Slowly opening his eyes, Ethan couldn't recognize his surroundings right away. A chunk of glowing coal was pressed into his hands, and before him, upside down, stood General Harrington. Yes, upside down. Only after another couple of seconds did Ethan grasp that he himself was hanging upside down. "Oh, my signature wake-up call worked," General Harrington noted with satisfaction, holding the piece of hot rock near his victim's face. "You can't imagine how much effort it took to build this kitchen. We barely have enough juice left to keep that cauldron boiling. The reactor's in bad shape." "You bastard," Ethan growled, feeling an intense burning sensation in his stomach. "Don't worry. A brand on livestock is normal. Otherwise, there'd be disorder, and disorder is bad. Very bad." The general tossed the coal aside and turned to Eve, who, like Ethan, hung upside down and was probably unconscious. But the moment General Harrington raised the coal toward her midsection, a sharp headbutt to his groin forced him to double over. "Arg! Damn you!" General Harrington howled, clutching himself and rolling on the floor. Eve struggled to free her bound wrists. The more she squirmed, the tighter the rope cut into her skin. Ethan tried to do the same, but it was too difficult. "You're wasting your time, my sweet ones, you're wasting your time," General Harrington muttered as he tried to get to his feet. "Do you know what's the tastiest part of the human body? The brain. You're a lunatic, a maniac. Eve screamed, refusing to stop her attempts to break free. Me? General Harrington asked with genuine surprise. No, darling, I'm the last one who's still sane. Eating people seems normal to you, does it? Then how am I any different from the zombies? Zombies? General Harrington laughed wildly again. You fools. An entire civilization fell for this stupid lie. Zombies, walking corpses devouring humans. What nonsense. His cackling was so repulsive and loud that it made Ethan want to retch, though maybe it was just the fact that he'd been hanging upside down in a reeking hellhole of rot. There are no zombies, the general went on in a rasp. None. You're the zombies. Idiots and zombies in one package. What are you talking about? Eve narrowed her eyes to slits, looking like a wild cat ready to pounce. You're the zombies, yes. All those droves of half-dead creatures pretending to be walking corpses, so stupid and terrified you hide from one another, living in holes, only coming out to scavenge for scraps, pretending you're zombies. Isn't that exactly what you do? What about the epidemic? Eve still didn't believe a word this deranged bunker dweller was saying. The epidemic was real enough, General Harrington nodded. Whole nations died out across the planet. Our supreme leader couldn't think of anything better than scorching infected areas to kill the virus. But we failed to coordinate with other countries. They took it as an act of aggression and struck back. Idiots. We tried to do good, but the whole world turned to ash. That's why our leader invented those so-called monsters, something everyone knows. That silly zombie story came in handy. People were happy to spread it and started destroying each other. Fear makes eyes see bigger threats. Right? So how do you explain the fact that I was bitten and I'm infected? Ethan glanced at the piece of rotten flesh in his pocket, then at his inflamed wound. How hard it is to live among fools, General Harrington grumbled. Maybe our supreme leader was right to blow the world to kingdom come. He shuffled over to where Ethan hung upside down, scrutinized the wound, and clucked his tongue. If I hadn't been in the military, I'd think you were right. But I know a bit more about the human body. He licked his upper lip dramatically, making Ethan shiver. Obviously, it's just a bacterial infection, easily treatable with a few doses of antibiotics and disinfectant. A pity. I plan on cooking you first, but it'll have to be your girlfriend instead. She looks more appetizing. Ethan felt two conflicting emotions at once, relief that he wasn't about to become a walking corpse, and despair at the thought of ending up as this mad cannibal's meal. But you're a military officer, Eve pleaded, appealing to Harrington's conscience. You're still human. How can you do this to us? Oh yes, General Harrington smiled. I've heard that so many times, so many touching speeches from my so-called victims. But they weren't victims. They were my saviors. The only victim is me. You think I like living in this stinking bunker with no light, no feeling but my own filth? You think I like eating human flesh? Then why do you do it? The hope in Eve's voice was fading. My dear, your father asked me the same thing. He was the first who openly tried to warn the world about what was happening. He found a cure for the epidemic. But the decision was already made, and it was too late. The first missiles had already hit. The world was smothered in ash. So you killed people to keep your secret? Eve asked. It's not my secret, my sweet girl, he replied. It's humanity's secret. Sooner or later, these idiots will figure it out, but there'll be no one left to blame. Ethan felt tiny legs skitter over his bound arms. He heard familiar squeaking and rustling behind his back. Well, my dear ones, lunchtime is coming, General Harrington said as he struggled to lift the giant lid on the boiling cauldron. The bunker lights flickered again and went out for a few seconds. From deep within the structure came a sound like the labored breath of a dying beast. The reactor's acting up, but don't worry. We'll manage. Clouds of steam rose and spread along the ceiling, forming strange shapes. The liquid inside bubbled and gurgled, and the walls were coated with a thick residue of filth and who knows what else. The stench of waste mixed with the thick aroma of spices, creating an even more nauseating odor. Ethan couldn't hold back any longer and vomited. "Don't worry," General Harrington sneered, brandishing a butcher's cleaver. "You'll get used to it soon enough. Can't you see the reactor is overloaded? Eve seized upon her last chance. Its shielding isn't working, and your cauldron is only making it worse. We'll have a nuclear explosion. We'll all die. Let us go." "Don't talk nonsense," he replied. "I've done this plenty of times with no problems. You're just scared. That's why you're spouting nonsense." As if contradicting him, the bunker shook again, like it was agreeing with Eve's words. "Now, I suppose you're judging me," General Harrington sneered. "But have you considered what I went through, alone in this bunker? No food, no light, no friends? The sewage failed, the ventilation failed, damn builders." He shook his fist at the ceiling, as though those on the surface could hear him. "You ate all your friends," Eve said pointedly, noticing the tiny mouse nibbling at the ropes behind Ethan. "I see you're not the timid type," he grinned. "I like feisty ones. You have a special mix of musk and spice about you. Your father was just as reckless, snarky, and defiant. If not for me, he would have let the whole world know what we did. I saved our secret. And maybe," he eyed up and down, "maybe I won't eat you right away. It's been a long time since I've had a woman, you know. That's not such a bad deal." "Maybe it's not," he said unexpectedly, forcing a soft smile. "Come closer and untie me. Then I'll do anything you want." Sounds tempting," General Harrington murmured, edging forward, but suddenly his expression darkened, and with a sharp motion he slapped Eve across the face. "You think I'm so simple I'd fall for that old trick?" He grabbed her chin roughly and brought the knife to her throat. "You really believed a man my age cares about women? Fool. Meat is meat." A sound like a sack of potatoes hitting the ground distracted General Harrington for an instant, long enough for Eve to slip the severed rope around his neck. "You little rat," he hissed, slicing through the rope, strangling him. Ethan sprang forward, ignoring the very real danger of impaling himself on the raised blade. The element of surprise gave them the upper hand. He tackled General Harrington to the floor, seized both hands on the knife handle, and kept it from delivering a fatal blow. They rolled around, gasping and cursing. "Careful," Eve yelled, noticing General Harrington reaching for the stoker rod leaning against the cauldron. The heavy swing landed on Ethan. It wasn't enough to knock him out, but it weakened his grip. Right then, the tiny mouse squeaked and leapt at General Harrington, digging its claws into his face. The shriek of pain echoed through the hall. Needle-sharp teeth tore mercilessly at his skin. "I hate these filthy rodents," he roared, jumping up and prying the mouse off his face. With a furious heave, he threw it against the wall, and it went still. "You bastards. Taking advantage of my kindness. But this ends now." General Harrington dropped the rod and took the knife in both hands, its tip aimed at a reeling Ethan. Zombies, what a joke. Who would have thought the whole world would buy into that nonsense? "Even worse than zombies," he sneered. Just then came a precise blow from behind. Harrington staggered. The bunker whirled around him, a blur of shapeless images and tangled sounds. A cacophony of voices rang in his ears, the cries of hundreds begging for mercy. Step by step, he thought he might still reach his attackers and finish them off, but a familiar aroma suddenly filled his nostrils. The smell of his favorite stew soothed his long-starved body. "Maybe we are zombies," Eve said, "but we're definitely not fools." With that, she shoved General Harrington into the open cauldron. His bulky frame toppled over the rim. The bunker's corridors instantly filled with his dying screams. No one could make out his final words, and Eve doubted they contained anything profound. She slid the lid back into place. The cauldron roared, automatically raising the temperature and adjusting to the optimal setting. Just to be sure, Eve yanked the remaining levers and opened the valves protruding from the reservoir. The single gauge's needle swiftly climbed into the red. The bunker itself groaned, as though in its final agony. "Come on, stand up," she urged, helping Ethan bandage his wounded leg. "We found out everything we needed to know. Soon this place will blow. There's no stopping that reactor now." The bunker rattled more violently than ever. Lights exploded, showering the filthy floors with shards of glass. The inside of the place shimmered and quaked in its death throes. "Wait," Ethan said, struggling to his feet. He made his way to the spot where the mouse, Jerry, lay motionless. "Little buddy," Ethan scooped it up in his palm, tears rolling down his cheek. "Come on, we don't have time," Eve repeated, tugging him toward the exit. They had only just cleared the subterranean structure when the bunker's innards roared like a wounded beast. Terror drove them onward, ignoring Ethan's stabbing pain. All his senses were heightened, and his mind blocked out everything but survival. A colossal plume of fire burst from underground. Earthquakes and ear-splitting thunder unleashed another wave of chaos and destruction upon what remained of the world. Is humanity doomed only to destroy everything around it, including its own home? Is this world we've created simply a hell that will never end? Or is everything already finished, with no road back? Confused thoughts tried to form clumsy structures in Ethan's mind, but his shell-shocked consciousness couldn't manage them. They ran without looking back, then dragged themselves forward, exhausted and in pain. The blast wave wasn't as strong as it might have been, at least partially contained by the bunker walls. "Stop, I can't go on," Ethan gasped, dropping to his knees. Eve sank down beside him. "You know, this place used to be called the Hollywood Hills," she observed with a faint smile. Sure enough, from where they stood, they could see a once majestic, now silent metropolis, bathed in the glow of a rising sun. Dust kicked up by the explosion gradually settled, leaving a grayish haze of mystery and fear of what lay ahead. Ethan had no desire to admire the view. He was overwhelmed by his sense of loss, even though what he'd lost wasn't the most precious thing in the world. It had grown dear over the past few days. That little mouse had become almost a friend, and his heart was breaking. Eve gently clasped Ethan's hand in hers. Tears streamed endlessly. Ethan recognized this feeling. He had felt it long ago, before his heart supposedly turned callous, ardent, and determined never to bond with another living being, especially not a mouse that had introduced itself by biting him in the backside. Gingerly, Ethan reached into his pocket, where he had placed the tiny friend. A slight tickle danced across his body. He shuddered, trying to quell the odd itch. Little paws scurried under his clothes, searching for an exit. "What on earth?" Ethan muttered, unsure of what he was feeling. Sure enough, the mouse had gnawed a fresh hole in his pocket. "This can't be," he breathed, wiping away another tear when a whiskered nose peeked out of his right sleeve. "You're alive. You really are alive," Ethan cried, leaping to his feet and forgetting his injury. Jerry squeaked softly, as if puzzled by Ethan's exuberance. "He seems happy to see you too," Eve said with a genuine smile, hugging a jubilant Ethan. "You scared me to death, little guy," Ethan whispered, and the mouse offered no reply. Perhaps words weren't necessary. Everything's going to be okay now, Eve declared confidently. Yeah, Ethan agreed. But what do we do about a whole world of zombies? Eve took one more look at the city waking from a long sleep. We'll tell them the truth. With that, she pulled a forgotten chunk of meat out of her pocket. She smiled, and so did Ethan,